Welcome to the Enchoris Podcast, a podcast that is focused on giving some insight on the German cultural management scene and what is happening in Germany that we don't usually communicate to the outside. And the idea is to spread what's happening here and give some interesting behind-the-scene views with people who do creative stuff or have had a journey in this industry, and try to give the world a little bit of what we do in Europe and we usually keep to ourselves. So I would like to welcome Robert Douglas today. Thank you for your time. Robert is primarily a musician, in my view.
Thank you.
And he made a very interesting journey trying to discover how he could expand his interests. What I always found interesting is that deep in the background, I feel that you approach the things you do with the same care you try to play music. That's my feedback on what I've seen over the 15 years we know each other. So
what a generous observation. Thank you.
That is kind, but I will try to be objective for the sake of our viewers and listeners. So no false compliment here, and I'll just start how we met, because we met under exactly that premise. Which was the Open Goldberg Variations Project. And in order to have a more interesting perspective on what that is, what can you say about that so many years later?
Well, yeah, so many years later. So the Open Goldberg Variations Project came at the time when music sharing on the internet was really taking off, and poor mothers were being sued by the record industry for the tracks that their children had downloaded, and there was a lot of fear and uncertainty and doubt about how digital sharing would affect the industry, and the industry was having a very, in my opinion, negative, visceral reaction against that. So we, when I say we, I mean Kimiko Ishizaka, the pianist, and I did a project, also with MuseScore, the software company, to create a public domain recording and printed score of Bach's Goldberg Variations, one of the most famous seminal pieces in the piano keyboard repertoire, or the keyboard repertoire. And we did it through crowdfunding, and we set Bach free. And this was already at least 15 years ago, I believe. And so this is digging into the history, but that was the venue through which we met.
I think that to give our listeners some context, because we've talked a lot in the podcast here about musicians, right? So I'll go backwards. At the moment, we have the problem that AIs are harvesting musicians' data and they're generating music without them getting any credit. Before that, we had the situation that Spotify and other streaming services were not paying accordingly. Before that, we had the problem that everybody was going to move to a form of blockchain, which didn't happen exactly like that. You see the pattern. What Robert said is basically that this is in a post-Napster reality where things like Pirate Bay existed and people took it upon themselves to approach human knowledge and content as a public domain issue. We're going to get into open source later, which is something Robert worked a lot on the software front, community-based. So what the context is of that is that the industry reacted to digitalization, and our last guest, which was Matthias Honsch, who just wrote a book about how we are giving ourselves up, which is kind of like his thoughts about 25 years of failing to approach digitization in a healthy way. And what Robert just said is that the companies reacted. For people who are younger, there were famous incidents of school bands getting sued for performing content. So it went too far, as it happens when something ends up being a legal process instead of something human. But that's a lot of context, but it's kind of like 25 years of history that happened too fast for anybody to adjust. So let's go back to Open Goldberg. We met in the crowdfunding phase, and you were very passionate about giving people the opportunity to learn and discover music back then. So that was the context. How did you get into music and playing horn?
Oh, that's a really nice story, actually. So my father was a musician. He is a musician. He plays trombone. And when I was 5 or 6 years old, we took a car trip to the local public library to watch a film, because that's the way we used to watch non-Hollywood films back then, reel to reel. And we watched a BBC production called The White Seal. And The White Seal has Beethoven's Sixth Symphony as its soundtrack. And I loved the movie. And on the car ride home, my dad said, "Oh, by the way, we could listen to the White Seal music at home." And I was like, that sounds really nice. So that started a habit that we had of me going to bed in the upstairs of the house and my father in the downstairs of the house cranking up Van Karajan's Beethoven 6 recording to the max that the stereo would support, and calling up, "See if you can stay awake until the storm." And I would try, and I think out of maybe 20 to 30 Beethoven 6 performances that I experienced that way, I only made it to the storm 4 or 5 times. So that began my love of classical music, and then also a lifelong collaboration with my father as a musician. I ended up playing in his band together that he conducted, playing in the orchestra that he was in, sitting right next to him as a trombone French horn duo, playing in the brass quintet that he was in. And when I went to college, he took a sabbatical year and came and played in the college band that I was in, doing a specialist degree in ethnomusicology. And now that I don't play horn anymore, I accompany him on piano, and he plays trombone, and he's limited by my poor piano skills to the intermediate level of trombone repertoire, but it's been a lifelong collaboration.
Wonderful. We're recording this on Father's Day.
Yes.
You're going to see it at a different date, but shout out to all dads out there who are trying to do a good job inspiring younger humans to find their passion. So, really, really special how you got into this. I didn't know any of this. So, that brings you to college where you study music.
Mm-hmm.
And how did you end up in Germany after that?
Right. Why is an American boy sitting here talking about things going on in Europe after all? That's weird. And why is a tech guy sitting here pretending to be a musician? Thank you very much. So, yeah, that's also interesting. I wanted to play in Germany as a horn player. It's maybe one of the best places on earth to be as a horn player who wants to play in a classical orchestra or an opera orchestra. And it was actually through the pianist we mentioned, Kimiko Ishizaki, that I got my opportunity to move here. Love was involved. Mm-hmm. So when we met in grad school, then it became an easy decision for me to move here. And I got a job in an orchestra and decided very quickly that it wasn't for me.
Okay.
And after that, during my orchestra tenure, I actually relearned how to program. I had first learned how to program computers when I was 10, but I put that passion aside for the horn. And taking the long train ride from Bonn to Solingen on a daily basis, I learned how to program Java as a means of getting out of the orchestra, of consciously deciding to set that career aside. And I became a computer programmer while still sitting in the orchestra, basically.
That's, for me, the interesting mix of skill sets you have. I did in the first Classical Hack Day, almost 15 years ago, I did a presentation on coding and score reading and the parallels. Because coders out there, a compiler reads your code and interprets it. And the unique thing is when you read a score, you are the compiler and you can write it. And we had a very interesting workshop where I showed some examples of codes and loops and dal segno and different ways to approach music performed with a string quartet. And you had the coders from most startups of that time that had to do with music, realizing that their skill set is not that far apart. So for me, a thesis I have is that people who learn to score read are actually pretty good at compiling code because they already think of it like a form of interpretation.
That is the most cogent correlation that I've ever heard. When I quit music to become a computer programmer, a lot of people said, oh yeah, computers, they have to do with mathematics and musicians are good at math. And then I instantly thought of 10 people I knew in the orchestra who couldn't add 5 plus 3. and I was like, no, it's not like that. And I had to think long and hard and try to find my own correlation. And the only correlation that I've been able to rest on up until now was that if you're good enough at something like music, which is hard to master at a professional level where you can win an audition and get a job, make recordings and stuff. If you have a talent that is that great on one vector, the chances of you having another talent on another vector are very high. They're not just necessarily mathematical talents or compiling talents or programming talents, but they could be cooking talents or athletic talents or whatever. It's just very high chance that you have more than one talent if you are already so good at something that you could be a professional musician.
That's why we see musicians and athletes and people who reach excellence. We build up a skill set, or you have to build up a skill set to achieve that. That requires discipline. It includes a lot of failure, and anybody who can code knows that that's 90% of the process. So you build up a resilience and a personality. For me, the nature of music, since it's sequential, what I mean by that is that you cannot jump back in time in a piece.
A piece starts and then it ends.
So by the nature of it, it has an algorithmic nature, and a musician perceives the frequency spectrum and the sequence and the human clues. So there's a lot that someone can learn from that. Very often I have talks with people, and your child does not have to be a professional musician, but it will learn a lot by engaging in the experience. And organically, as humanity, we let the most talented of us achieve it. And some people are late bloomers, some people are very talented at youth. But for me, the really, really special thing, and I'm going to ask you, we know so many people who went from music to coding, and for me the explanation is only that they have mastered a skill like prima vista score reading. Prima vista means that you read a piece for the first time, and that's obvious when it comes down to linguistics. Like when you read a text in the newspaper, you have not read it before, but you're only receiving. As a musician, you have to interpret directly very often. And that skill set is, in my view, puts you in a compiling frame of mind that creates a different contextual mapping for creating code. And it helps you with more, for example, that's why a language called Python is so popular with a lot of musicians, that it has a more structural nature. But we're here deep in the details of our common interests. But I wanted to share that with you, and I want to ask you, what is the common pattern with musicians becoming coders, apart from the fact that it was one of the most lucrative jobs to have in the past 20 years?
You just prevented me from saying poverty is the answer. Poverty is a hell of a drug. Yes,
it's the level of effort and talent that goes into music is very often not compensated with the realities of our society.
Unfortunately.
And I just saw, for example, yesterday, the Musikinformationszentrum, the German Institute for Music-Related Data. The average teacher of music in Germany who works freelance makes 14,000 euros a year. And the average freelance musician, singer, opera singer makes 14,000, which tells you, and averages are always a stupid way of explaining a reality, but it shows you the level of depreciation for those jobs in recent years, especially with inflation and the way society builds up. So we cannot solve a societal problem like that over stimulus and financing. It's a bigger problem. I just want to address the reality that leads a lot of people to quitting.
Aside, though, from the financial pressure of needing to survive long enough as a musician to make it, to grab your toehold, to get established as an artist, you still need to pay rent and buy groceries during that phase. Aside from that, there are some things that are pretty banal but interesting that do unify all of the musicians who have side gigs in technology. And I think one of them is basically the ability to work at home or be mobile as a worker and have your skills be universally recognized. If you were going to try to support your musician career as a doctor, it wouldn't work. Aside from getting through medical school, you'd then be nailed to a place and a country and a medical system, and you wouldn't have the geographical freedom that a musician often needs to pursue an international career. And you wouldn't have the flexibility of time. Musicians and artists have very unorthodox time commitments that they need to make to their opera company or their orchestra or their string quartet. And a doctor or a lawyer or a teacher can't abide such stringent flexibility. Like, you have to be able to decide to record on Father's Day or rehearse at 10 p.m. To really have the flexibility needed as a musician. So I see the ability of somebody to be able to open their laptop, type stuff, maybe talk to somebody via Zoom or Skype back in the day remotely, and then submit their work product over the internet as being a fundamental facilitator for the people that we know in common, for example, to have supported their musician careers as technologists.
So more than the assumption that I make that it's a compatible skill set, the realities and the benefits of remote work actually opened a route for people to find and adapt to that industry faster than anybody else, because it basically served their main ambition.
And also just the small detail of timing in our human journey. When I decided I didn't want to be in the orchestra anymore in 2001, it was the internet boom. And I walked by a magazine stand in the Cologne Hauptbahnhof here, in the train station here, and the magazine stand, the Computer Weekly or whatever it was, said, "Young man, go Java." I was like, okay, I'll go Java. Looks simple enough to me. So I learned Java because of that magazine. And the timing mistake, or fortunate mistake for me, was that was the perfect timing to do that thing, and any other time, earlier or later, it wouldn't have worked out the same way. I would have had to do something else. But my failback plans from when I was younger, like, if I don't make it as a horn player, I'll be a teacher. Not in Germany, I wouldn't be. No, not an American kid who had just shown up and couldn't speak German. I couldn't be a teacher in the school system here. So I had to have something that was flexible enough to accommodate. It had to be new enough that it wasn't regulated.
I understand what you mean. And as an expat, also, I realized that was also a way for a lot of people to work remotely and basically keep the benefit they had from their language or context in a different environment.
I didn't want to learn a new profession auf Deutsch in German. My German wasn't good enough back then, and I needed to study in English. Which actually leads to a funny story, because then I did get a first student job in a computer software company, and the interview had gone okay in German, but I had studied everything in English. Everything. So I'm going to add a little bit of German insider humor here, but we'll explain it as it goes for the non-German speaking audience. So I showed up on my first day of work as a computer programmer, and they said, "Herr Douglas, hier ist Ihr Rechner." And I was like, "What's that?" "Herr Douglas, das heißt Computer." It was my computer. I didn't know the word for computer. "Herr Douglas, brauchen Sie eine Tastatur? So oder so?" And I was like, "Tastatur? Oh, that's a keyboard." Okay. I didn't know the word for computer or keyboard, and it went on like that And I really credit that job for teaching me much more German than almost any other experience. I learned things like, ich hätte erwartet, ich weiß nicht warum, geht es voran, which means I would have expected, I don't know quite why you did it that way, and are you making any progress? Those are the German things that I learned in my first job.
So that kind of explains how language barriers have broken with the development of software and remote working, and that it allows people to work in a context without having to go through a process of starting from zero. So that's probably then the most defining reason for musicians finding income and employment in those industries as a transition, because teaching doesn't pay off as much as it used to either in the music sector.
In any sector.
In any sector, unfortunately, because that's what we should be investing for the younger people to come with a more sensitive and enhanced understanding of reality. But again, a big social problem that we can solve with a talk here. So that brings you to coding. To give some context, I'll spoil the storyline and I'll go to the end. You are developing now a spec-driven AI called SpecKitty. To our audience out there, that is in making software, there is the software engineer and the analyst. I'll make a very oversimplified analysis. An analyst is someone who describes what the product should do, what its character should be, what functionalities. And instead of telling an AI, just do this, you provide more context and you automate processes and you secure that you have a result that is context aware. That is a very oversimplified explanation of what that is for the technical people out there, but I think it would give our audience an understanding of, because for me the story is a musician ends up doing a spec-driven AI, and just like you said, you enter Java in the beginning of the internet, and now we are at a point where code is generated mainly by AI, and that humans now have a supervising and editing and contextual function in it. Okay, that's a little future-oriented. We're not there yet 100%, but the tool we are building is focused on how humans interact with code and how this goes back and forth. And since we skip all the steps in between, what do you think that has to do with music?
Well, you set the question up really well, because the realization for this conversation that I'm having as we're speaking is that music, as we do it through the European written music tradition, spoken and written language, and the computer code that humans write to tell computers what to do when they run a computer program, all have one thing in common, and that is that I'm able to take a concept in my brain, whether it's a melody or a poem or a set of instructions for a computer, and I can write them on a piece of paper and I can hand it to you. And for all of three of those, for you, you would know what I mean. In each case, you would be able to see and sing the melody. You would be able to understand a version of the emotions that I was having when I wrote the poem. And you would be able to tell me what the logical business outcome or information outcome of the computer program is. And the fact that they have these things in common means that they are equally susceptible to or have equal opportunities within large language models, because those are text generators in every case. And music, written music, and human languages and computer code are all text. You can reduce them all to text. And that actually brings us back to the Open Goldberg Variations Project, where one of our main goals was to bring the Goldberg variations into music XML, which is a text-based format for expressing music notation, so that we would have a standardized score for computer consumption of that piece. So the fact that they have all three of these things in common, all three of these things have text in common, means that they're all equally applicable to large language models. Now, people might be asking, I don't know if my ChatGPT is so good at notating music or not. Well, that has to do with the volume of the training data and the business impetus. So the way that AI and music has gone is way different with, taking recordings and turning them into images and then finding similarities in those images. But actually, if you trained a computer on the music XML, it would be able to generate notes for you, actually written notes. And it can to an extent. So where was I going with that? I think it's important for the audience to understand that human language and what we feed to computers to tell computers to do a thing have a lot in common. And therefore, ChatGPT or an AI is equally good at writing a limerick or writing a Python function.
To give context, XML is a form of, think of what you would do in a chart like Excel. And XML, since that happened, has been standardized for music. It has developed, and it really helps with notation. So more than, I think people are more literal in writing digital notation now than they ever were.
Mm-hmm.
And more people can read notation than ever in history. Because we never talk about the benefits of what happens with progress. We usually, in this industry, try to focus on not destroying some of the meaningful stuff, as we should. But it's good to see both sides of the argument. So the Open Gold Variation Project was also interesting because we later extended also in moving that, for example, in the direction of Braille, which was the point that we worked on together. So Braille is a language developed for people to, instead of sight reading, you feel it with your finger and you can read it. And that was an effort to move notation to a language people who cannot see can read. So here we go again in an interesting direction. I don't think any of our viewers would have a problem if an AI translated scores for people to read who cannot have the ability to see them. And then we see how understanding functionality and goal can put things into perspective. And to go back to when we met and what the idea would be, today we would, based on what you are working on and what spec-driven development is, we would give context to the AI agent. We need a person who cannot read a score to use this developed language, and I would like you to translate this. And if you think about it, the work we tried to get financed back then is so much easier to do today. And I know that's obvious to you, but we're talking about 15 years, and in this podcast, we proactively take a stance to secure musicians' existence and rights. So the priority is always to remember that human creativity is a fundamental right and people should make a living out of it. But it's a good opportunity with you to talk a little bit as someone who is now on the technology side about what benefits we can have, not from generative AI, but also from AI functionalities that serve human goals. And I think the Braille example is a great example. I was listening yesterday to how dependent Rome was on papyrus, and how the wars between Rome and Egypt actually ended up with a Roman bureaucracy could not work without it. So it would freeze the Roman Empire that they could not do their bureaucracy. To make an analogy today, we don't want to make a society where we're so dependent on everything that society would freeze if someone blows up a cable of data in the ocean, which is what is at stake at the moment. So how would you explain to a 10-year-old kid what a spec AI is, to make it very playful?
Yeah, well, I have a good analogy. So assuming everybody's tried out ChatGPT and you've seen how you can give it a prompt and you get text as a result, or sometimes an image. My sister, who's an elementary school teacher, has taken that and she's decided that her classroom should do a play every year. And she wants the children to write the play, only having 6-year-olds hand write an entire play won't go. She can't. So what they do is they decide upon the structure of the play. Who are the characters going to be? Who's going to play the characters? What should be the major events in that play along the way? What should be the vocabulary parameter for the 6 or 7-year-olds so that they're challenged, but they're not using words that they wouldn't normally use or don't really understand. So all of these parameters are then given in to ChatGPT, and ChatGPT writes a play, and the kids love it. They just think it's magical, and they then enact this play, and they feel like they've co-created it, but they've created something that draws on knowledge and ability beyond what they primarily have in their heads, and that's actually a learning experience, and that's what learning is all about, is moving beyond what's already in your head and stretching your head a little bit into a direction that it wasn't stretched before. So if we take that analogy to computer programming, my sister could have written that play. It would just take her a very long time, and she doesn't have that much time or energy as a elementary school teacher to do it, and she would have to not do that entire exercise without that tool. Programmers are the same way. A programmer could write any computer program they want. It just takes lots of time. And therefore, to write a big piece of software, a company would have previously needed 10, 20, 30 developers and certain amount of millions of dollars and certain numbers of months to do it. And with AI helping you code, where the AI can write the code in the same way that it wrote the play quickly, you give it parameters. You give it the structure. You give it the things that you want to achieve, the functional requirements, the spec. And SpecKitty helps you develop that specification in a way that when you give it to the AI, the software that you get on the other side is actually the software you want. Because the other thing that can happen, if you think about that elementary school play, is like you could end up with a Chekhov's gun situation for your third graders, because you say, I want a dramatic play, and the AI thinks, well, definitely the gun that's sitting on the mantle in Act 1 is going to go off by Act 3. No, these are third graders.
So basically you're describing that there's no context awareness.
Right.
And linguistic models don't have the human awareness and the sensitivity, and providing specs actually helps to put a frame. This is PG-13, or this has to not have strong language, it has to have sensitivities, focus on diversity, so you can actually provide a safety framework for it to operate. And it's also a way to reduce hallucinations, as far as I understand.
Yes.
Because the depth of context provided then limits AI taking initiatives based on no understanding of the situation and just creating something because it has to finish the task. I always compare AI to the person you give a task and who will just do the job just to get rid of it. In the little things, it has no clue. It will just fill in the spot. And I'm being playful because we create a technology and people either idolize it and give it godlike attributes or demonize it. And what we're talking about here is how can we start accepting the reality that AI is going to be a part of our lives and try to get a deeper understanding of what skills that we need as humans to operate it, the responsibilities that come with respecting ownership, authorship, and this is going to be also an interesting gateway to how open source software, specifically will operate in times of AI. And a lot of the things we use are open source, we just don't know it. So it's important for people in the cultural sector we move and we live in to also have an understanding of the technological situation and not simply of what is evangelized by AI companies and the false promise of we'll substitute people, we'll cut your costs. No, we don't need. We just need to make better products, better services, put intelligent people in the right positions and not have people coding in a coal mine What I mean by that is in the past 20 years, there are people who code, and they code in the same sense you would put someone in a coal mine working without any sense of result or claiming something personally. And here we can go to a situation where a coder is a creator again. And I'm trying to spin it in a very positive way that's reactionary to popular narrative. So this is not necessarily my full opinion, but more food for thought. And your past and your present, because music does not get out of someone's life, is for me important, because I would like to ask you something that's surprising. How do you think spec-driven and design workflows that are human-focused in the process revive a little bit of the communal aspect of working together, despite the fact that we're interacting with machines? And that was very abstract even for my standards. So I will reframe this as, how do you think this way of working with AI, where a human creates spec, AI codes, a human makes a revision of it and improves, how do you think that changes collaboration?
I'll give you an example from the SpecKitty trainings that I do. So you have to imagine, for me, that means I'm going into a software company that has been writing software for a very long time, and they're wondering what it means for them that they're going to have agentic AI coding coming into their company, because it's shaking their industry like every other industry. So I come in and I show them what AI can do for coding. And usually I have a very cross-functional team. I have like the founder or the CEO of the company. I have maybe the chief technical officer, the product owner, maybe the customer representative, some of the coding developers, seniors, juniors, project manager, cross-functional, everybody, somebody from everybody in the company's in the room. And they work on the specification, and the AI is taught by SpecKitty to challenge them, to ask them questions, to say, do you like this or do you like that? Should it be like this or should it be like that? Should you use this library or that library? Do you want this architecture or that architecture? It's kind of like in the play, do you want a happy ending or a sad ending? Should there be a song in the middle? Should we dance? So the design choices that they have to make in those moments are similar to the design choices that they would be making individually at their desks, under earphones, looking at a monitor on a daily basis. But surprisingly, they find themselves all on a call together, making those choices together. So the way it usually goes is SpecKitty asks the lead developer, do you want a red button or a blue button? And she says, well, I'll make it blue. I always do. And her colleague says, is that where all the blue buttons are coming from? I always make them red. And the business analyst says, oh, guys, I just talked to the customers yesterday. They want yellow buttons from here on out. And the CEO is like, hold on, this button thing, is that the thing we were talking about last week in the meeting? And 45 minutes later, they're not even talking to the AI anymore. They're talking to each other about, what do we really want to build? What are we actually building here? And what is good? What does good look like? What does it feel like? What does it taste like? What's the taste? What's the ethos? Why are we doing this in the first place? And the AI is going like, when you know what the questions are, I can answer them.
Interesting. This is actually really helpful as an example. We had talks here about generative AI, AI tools for music, AI tools for a lot of the things that work in the cultural sector. And what you bring here to the table with this is that we actually have, with this big technological shift, to have a real appreciation of what we should be working on as humans in a company, in an orchestra, in a theater. And when you talk about ethos and emotion in art and depth, those things are not subjective and cannot be outsourced. So it actually, what I realize from what you say is that a team has to claim more responsibility and not get lost in the predefined workflows or the habits that get built up in any business will develop some habits and some
The ceremonial
nature of collaboration.
Yeah.
And it's a comfort zone to avoid conflict. So basically, AI is like a disruptor that helps teams reevaluate their own stance without it being it's almost like you bring an enemy. You can have a common enemy who criticizes you, which is by default what we do as consultants. You go into a situation and you're not part of the team. The person in the team who would say the same opinion would not have the same weight because he's an insider. So what I see here is an aspect of consultation and going back to the fundamentals of creation. Because if a machine can build something fast, we have to give it faster and clearer and more concise directions to create something tangible, right?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a danger there, though, too. If the machine says, do you want a red button or a blue button? It's like price anchoring. It's like, hey, how much is this glass of water? Give me €5 for it. And you'll say like $4.50. Whereas, I mean, it might be a 50-cent glass of water, right? The price anchor, the first thing that you hear, influences all of the negotiations after that. The first choice that you see in a decision influences everything. I'm sure that a lot of great composers had a melody, one cadence, one chord progression in their mind. And that influenced the entire piece, and they built the piece around it because they needed the vehicle to exist for that chord progression, that moment to happen. And the whole piece is great as a result. But if they had been shown a different chord progression first, they would have never heard that one in their mind to begin with. It would have blocked that space with a false choice. So in creation and in software development as well, being given a choice of 2 or 3 highly plausible options to choose from ignores the fact that there's a long tail of infinite other options, and it was your job to go into that space in the first place.
So it's almost like it creates a predefined environment where innovation is killed by the fact that you don't look outside your options, and that you're basically, it's almost like reality is prescripted for the wrong understanding of this would be those are all my options instead of those are some options, and it's a starting point. And I think that messes with the way our human brain is. We have a lot of biases, and it almost creates a validation bias. If AI says it, I'd go down that road. So I understand what you mean, that we have to be more aware of our decision-making process.
It's even more pernicious than that, because if you understand that what an AI is a statistical understanding of everything that it's been shown, it has no capability of coming outside of what it was shown in the first place in its training. It has zero capability of showing you a statistical probability of a thing that has never existed before. It's like, to really make it visceral, there are 2 glasses on this table. There is no glass right here. If you ask an AI, what would a glass look like here? It's going to look like one of these 2 glasses because that's all it can see in this space.
Context.
It will not make a coffee cup there. It will not make a Kölsch glass. It will not make a Bierstein. It will not make a champagne flute. It will make a water glass that is between 1/4 and 1/2 full only. It can't escape that.
So it's a form for everything becomes homogeneous because it draws from the same sources. And that's part of what has been resurfacing in interviews we do here on the podcast, that the unique surprising ability humans have to create something crazy that would make no sense from a perception of what we know already. And that quality we have, evolutionary, cannot be substituted by a set of data. It's just an optimization algorithm. And I call AIs very often a very fast parser who will basically make a conformed decision based on a limited set of data. And with the awareness it has, it just will do it at light speed compared to our own capability.
Well, and on an amount of data that is incomprehensible to humans. So why it seems magic and godlike to people is because of all of the data that it was fed in the training, which in most cases for the state-of-the-art models that we're talking about that people are familiar with, Gemini or ChatGPT or Claude, the amount of data is unfathomable. It literally involves every book that they could find, every page on the internet, every Wikipedia article ever written, all of the public domain writings, all of the scientific literature, all of the images, all of the sounds, everything that has been digitized in the last 30 years was put into these things as a statistical modeling input. So it seems magical because it can draw on anything that has already existed, practically. And that is magical, and that's really useful too. It's also plagiarism in a lot of cases.
That's the
straight up plagiarism.
Absolutely. And not trackable for the human mind. No. And we need to build algorithms that track back to the idea, give credit, and give context.
But it's never original. It can only fill in the spaces between two similar points. So sure, there's no cup of water there on the table. AI could put one there. But it can't create a new drink that we've never had.
People, I think, draw a lot from sci-fi and sentient wishes for intelligence to be above what we know. So I think a lot of people draw from 50 years of science fiction and the dream of, it has a lot to do also with spirituality, God. So people draw a lot of those concepts and they project it on a technology that is in the beginning and has limits. And I think the evangelizing people do for the products pushes people into this. It can solve all my problems. And that's where we're getting to snake oil territory.
Well, I mean, admit it. If you had to raise $30 billion every 6 months just to keep your company alive, you'd probably say some funny things too.
I would fail terribly at that, and I'm the least competent person to sell something like that. That's why I do what I do, but absolutely, it's an impossible task, and for people out there, those things are technically for free because they are trying to collect investor money based on promise. So if you're not paying for a product, you're paying for the promise of a product for someone to invest in it.
If you're not paying for the product, you are the product.
Usually. And your data. And that's a good pitfall for privacy, which brings me to, I know you also work on privacy for AI, and I cannot stretch how important that is. What are your recommendations to having a useful and how do you keep your privacy in AI? People are struggling with privacy in general online, from social media, how their data, and it gets to a point where most people are not informed. Is like my chat encrypted or not? What difference does it make? Are my data used for training? So we're getting to a reality where it would take us half an hour to give people 20 recommendations. But what?
It's a near impossible situation. So without talking about AI directly, let's just take the case of the company Meta.
We're close to the date. I know where you're going. We're close to the date where they stop encrypting their chats and they're going to use your personal conversation for training.
We're talking about Instagram and WhatsApp and Facebook, which, let's face it, everybody uses. And even if you consciously try not to use it, you go to a website on the internet that does use Facebook, you're still tracked. You've still got the Facebook cookie there. So And why does that matter? Facebook has actively lobbied at the European level to influence European legislation to its own benefit, not for the good of the industry of Europe, not for the good of the consumer of Europe, only for Facebook's benefit. And this is well documented and well known. So therefore, it's fair to judge Meta as an enemy of Europe. I do. I judge Meta and everything that they do, all of those products that I just mentioned, as the enemy of Europe. So given that background, if I walk up to somebody and say, don't use WhatsApp, change to something like Signal for your direct messaging because it protects your privacy, I get yawns of incomprehension and non-caring. I get very few people who actually take that threat seriously. And there's a nihilist attitude of, well, I won't make a difference. I don't have anything to hide. And me being on this free product that is so useful, WhatsApp, doesn't make a difference. And I can't tell you how much of a difference it does or does not make, because we're talking large numbers here. You're one of hundreds of millions of people who are on these platforms. But if you look at the principle, to be secure and private, you would, as a European, avoid Meta products at all cost. And that's only the prelude to AI privacy.
Which is a step further in harvesting data in a more extreme way.
Much more extreme way. You're now giving information to a set of programs that are quickly being taught to use all known psychological techniques and all known game theory and gamification processes to make you a more and more dependent consumer. So let me give you a thought example. Let's say I give you a machine that'll bake you a cake. I love cake. I want a cake. You want a cake. You say, yes. Okay, machine, bake me a cake. How much does it cost? Oh, it's free. The first one. You know, the first use of this machine is free. You say, okay, push the button. Out comes the cake. It's not quite fully baked. Could you just bake it a little bit longer? And yeah, okay, comes out. It doesn't have any frosting. Could you cut it for me? I need a fork to eat it. Is there whipped cream? I want a candle. It's a birthday cake. So it's not just one. And the way that AI works, whether it's just by sheer coincidence or nefarious design, is that you never quite get done with what you're doing. This is really important for the coding people who are using it to write computer programs, because you need your computer program to be done. And there's an addictive quality to this. You feel like you're being productive, but an hour later, you've got a cake that's not quite the cake you wanted, but it has all the things you did want. Like, it's got candles, not quite the right number, and the frosting is green, not blue, and it's cut, but not in nice pieces, and you've got a spork and not a fork, but you'll eat some cake. And now they've got you. They've got all your data. They've got you on a subscription that you need to keep putting the cake back in the cake baking machine. You could have just learned how to bake a cake, but that would have been too hard. And
it's an extension to the instant gratification, and basically you can see that in mice when they test things on animals. We can discuss whether that should be done or not, but the principle is that they would prefer gratification to pain. They would prefer pain in order to get the gratification. So we are wired that way. So what you're saying is that our neuroscience is already being hacked then. And I can validate what you say about coding and text. You get a result fast, but if you revisit it on a day later, it's not good. And the result would be, okay, let's refine it. And the next day would be, let's refine it again. And then you get to a point where you could have just written the text with an authentic representation of what you want to say.
And in the process, you've lost a bit of your ability to write the text in the first place. So the second time around, you're even less likely to do it in the first place, because then you feel like, well, I can't really bake a cake if the cake baking machine doesn't do the first step for me.
I understand what you mean. The same thing happens in the music industry. before AI, when a producer would say, yeah, do that, but do it a little different. And you end up writing music, and someone changes your music, and then you lose your connection to your own material. To give you an example, the average song that monetizes in popular music used to have 3.8 or 3.2 songwriters. Now it's around 10.
Mm-hmm.
And the point is that who is writing what? And you lose yourself as an artist, as an identity, and what you're trying to... I think that's the biggest danger with schools. If children don't have an hour where you're with a blank piece of paper and you go from that blank piece of paper to a beautiful sketch or a beautiful text with all its mistakes.
Or a failure.
That's not a failure.
Yeah.
It's not, I'll put it in destructive way, it's not good enough for certain standards.
But it's learning.
It's learning.
And it's flexing your ability no matter where it is, and stretching your mind or your brain towards a goal. And that's hard work.
I think instrumentalists and people who actually use their body, for people who are craftsy, and we've built a neuroscience interaction between our intellect and our physical body that creates very interesting results. For example, handwriting, it's proven that certain aspects of our brain are trained in ways you cannot do by typing. So we're giving up a little bit of how much we've evolved as humans through this, only for the sense of dopamine. And it's important to use a tool and be critical about the effect it has on us collectively. And when we talk about code, a lot of people use it to find and debug mistakes you wouldn't find in 1,000 lines of code. That's fantastic. Or if you're looking for a mistake in a protein in a health situation. But it cannot substitute creation, ideation, authenticity. And then the interesting part is, what would a person who will work with Spec AI, what's your ideal candidate for someone who works like this?
Well, I'll tell you why I use SpecKitty, the product that I build, which is, by the way, open source, free to use, and not trying to sell it to you.
No. It's about transparency.
Yeah.
And you still need a form of AI to interact with.
Right.
It.
So the way the way that you use SpecKitty, and the reason why I built it was I was actually working on a different product. Through AI, I came out of retirement as a coder. So I spent the first 15 years of my technology career actually writing code as my main job. And then one day my boss heard me talk, and he was like, wow, that guy's probably a better talker than he is a coder. We should put him on the sales team. And that basically ended my coding career. And then I spent time doing sales and marketing and customer support and all these things around software that you need that aren't actually building software. So I had a 10-year period where I lost all my skills. So I didn't practice my coding skills on a daily basis, and I didn't keep up with the rapid pace of development of new technology and frameworks and React and Vue and all that stuff. AI has allowed me, as a retired coder, a retired computer programmer, to go back to computer programming and generate code based on my intent. So I intend for there to be a software that does a thing. And the AI gives me a half-baked cake that represents the software that does that thing, and I push it back into the oven to say, now fix it like this. And it comes back out, and then I push it back in, and it says, now fix it like this. And that wasn't going fast enough for me. I was trying to build a product for AI security, AI privacy, and I just didn't feel like I was getting to the end goal fast enough. And I was like, I need a way to be able to describe exactly what I want in words that I understand and have that translate as my intent into the AI so that it gives me back a perfect birthday cake like I want it, not something that I don't want in the software sense. So I built SpecKitty to be that. So it's the framework for expressing your human intention and then decomposing that through multiple steps. So making the specification, which is the what are we building, making the plan, which is the how are we building it, making the tasks, which is like in what order we need to build it, and then handing that recipe to the AI and getting back really perfectly what I had wanted as software. So the ideal person to use that is somebody who wants software, has intention, is able to express the intention at some level of clarity, and probably somebody who has either already developed the sense of what good software looks like and what good software architecture looks like, maybe somebody who's a coder now or who was in some form in the past, who can look at the results and say, yeah, but okay, let's work on this part of the specification so that this part of the software is actually how it's meant to be. So people who are so good at coding that it's always perfect and it comes out fast and on time and without any bugs, they don't need this. But people who have a good understanding of computers, they're going to go 1,000 times faster than they could go before. And people who are just getting into software and have intent and have a need for software and they wish they had a software and they, for whatever reason, don't want to or can't hire somebody to program it for them, they can use generative AI and a Claude Code subscription or a ChatGPT Codex subscription and SpecKitty to build software that would have otherwise been unattainable for them just by giving the intent and having it organized in a way that's a perfect recipe for the perfect cake.
I use the shoemaker analogy very often, that a talented shoemaker will sell shoes for 5,000 euros, 10,000 euros, will be a shoemaker at an opera house or a very special situation. You cannot compete with a machine that makes 10,000 pairs of sneakers or 3D printed shoes.
But I mean, for that matter, you don't have 10,000 Maria Casals either.
Exactly.
Maria Callas.
What I mean is that we need to both appreciate craftsmanship, talent, and then it's like, what is my product intended for? So I think we're at the crossroads. Humanity is in a form of paradox like it was in the Industrial Revolution. And there's power struggles, there's the political and power games and oligarch games in the background. For me, this framework we're talking here is for people who are in the arts. That means they already have a sensitivity for human expression. And we're not trying to evangelize or promote anything. It's more about the reflection. And more in the past years, I realized that there's this famous quote that people are going to lose their jobs, not to AI, but to a person who can operate it. And we just have to realize that we, just like operating a machine, a good craftsman who knows how to operate a machine has a dual skill set. He will never outperform that super talented person who does a task in an unattainably good way. Some of us are talented, some of us in humanity are more talented than others. And the point is how we distribute this in a way where we contribute to society. For me, that's and this talk is more, my intent was that we create a little bit of clarity against the whole evangelized, and marketing is the way it is. And like you said, when you're trying to finance something, what should you do? It promise sells and product pays. So for me, this is an interesting step in our consciousness, which brings me to something I think you did really well in the past. You've done a few successful crowdfunding campaigns. And I think that's going to become really important at the moment for projects again, because the way the world is going with wars, there's not going to be a lot of money around for certain things that are not instantly profitable. What did crowdfunding and community building in the open source community teach you about reaching people and engaging them?
Yeah, that's a great question. And there is a direct correlation between working on an open source software project or building and starting a company or doing a crowdfunding campaign. And I'd say that the most important ingredient in all of that is always you have to look at the other people who could potentially engage with you in whatever way, whether they're giving you money on Kickstarter or they're buying your product or they're going to contribute code or use your software. You have to be able to look at it from their point of view and think, what are they going to get from this? And then give words to that. So whatever you have to paint the picture if you're going to communicate of why their life is going to be better after they take the step that you want them to take to help you. So it becomes a win-win situation. Because if it's an exploitative or extraction situation, you will fail or you'll just be a jerk.
To put it in context, for example, an artist who only thinks about financing his project and thinks, okay, I deserve the money for the work I do, but he doesn't really think for about the usage of what he provides from the other person. For example, what I mean, to make it simple, someone makes a recording and he thinks, okay, the other person gets the recording. There has to be more thought put into, and the example you made about software is super clear, so I'm trying to go an abstraction level higher, because you've also done it with music. The point is, what do I provide to anyone who engages and supports? So in the end, can I translate what you said, that it has to be a partnership instead of an acquisition?
Yeah, and it's a partnership, whether it's the person who gives you $2 on Kickstarter or it's the company who signs up as a sponsor and gives you $10,000 on Kickstarter. And that seems like two different cases, but it's the same case in each one. You have to explain to them why their life is better after they support you. To the $2 person, it's because they get to be part of this bigger narrative. They get to ascribe their taste setting to something that's obviously going to be great. And to the $10,000 partner, it's like, yeah, you I don't know, maybe you get a tax write-off. Maybe you get visibility, usually is what somebody like that would be. You get to, I won't choose your competitor. It can also be business. A valid.
It's business.
Yeah.
So what I'm trying to get to here, do you think that in the future, open source projects, artistic projects will be more dependent on building a community around what they do in order to get something financed or done or to preserve it? What I mean by that is we talk a lot about AI simplifying implementation. But I think what will get exponentially harder is convincing people to commit and be part of something.
Oh, you're asking me to predict really hard things. What I can say is that AI is amazing. And I've even used AI songs that other people generated in my work. I presented at a conference where somebody had used Sora to prompt Sora's a AI for generating music, in case you all didn't know that already. And they had generated a song for this software project, and I used that. I mean, they gave it to me, and I used that on the stage for their software project, and they sang along with it, and we had a whole group sing along based on this AI-generated song. And my point here is that the song was okay. You would never remember it more than 5 minutes if you didn't love that software project, because it sounds a little bit like this and a little bit like that and a little bit like that. It's derivative. It's like the glass that's in between these two glasses in the song sense. But the moment with the people in the room celebrating something that they had achieved, hung up on the rack of this song, everybody going through a vocal lesson that I gave them about how to sing it, made a moment because of the people in the room. Not because of the song, but the people being involved was the moment.
And the communal experience.
The communal experience. So the song was pale like water in terms of quality. But the moment that it facilitated with the people in the room was magical. And I mean, the play that my sister writes with her 6-year-olds is not going to be
It's not going to be
play.
Shakespeare.
But the moment that they have communally as a result of it with that framework is art.
That is the big debate here, because it's a meaningful human experience, and without being elitistic, I will talk against my opinion. People copy each other. Humans always did it. So there's sound alikes, which was playing with the legal limits on how to copy someone else's music and then filing it. So the problem isn't new, and humanity is also not known for being 100% ethical or perfect. So none of the products it create will. So the question with the play is, there's nothing more wonderful than kids having a co-creating experience. And I think that was the big benefit of the open source movement. My criticism to a lot of open source projects is that they never gave credit to certain things they copied, and they were not aware they were copying. The whole Ruby on Rails, for example, Ruby on Rails was a language. And I will never forget that a famous company called 37 Signals provided it, and most people were trying to copy what they do, even though they gave them infrastructure to make whatever they wanted. And I think that's a very... the open source community has many wonderful benefits. We're talking here about the morality and the ethics of appreciation and giving credit. And there is something to be said that all collective knowledge is a part of our human collective experience. So in a way, everything is public domain in many ways by nature. And it's not about legislation or morality. You see that it's an overwhelmingly complicated subject, and it's only about the specifics. But to get back to your sister's play, I wouldn't change anything of that. But the point is, we also have to make sure then that's the story we made, we co-created, and there are some people who have made the stories that are archetypes. And even if you go back to Homer or some of the people who collected fairy tales, they were also aggregators, which means they collected public knowledge and traditions and compiled it, which again is a form of art. And you see that I fall into the pitfall that it's not about one simplified answer, yes, no, but I'm trying to bring the moral and ethical dilemma and the challenge of it to the foreground without demonizing something and without dismissing it and without losing that feeling that when you hear someone play piano, you realize who he is, and there's proof, for example, that when we listen to something, it changes the chemistry in our body, and that's recreated every time we see it. So we're very complex beings. So you see my inner conflict with this, right?
Oh, I do.
And
I experience all of that too. And there's one more golden nugget out of the recent years of culture that I can just put on the table, and that is YOLO. You only live once. This is your life to live, and you have to go for the experiences and the creation and the path that you're drawn to, and make the most out of what you've got in front of you. And if you try to be a perfect ascetic nihilist, and you can't talk to somebody because they would need WhatsApp, and you don't use WhatsApp on moral grounds because it has to do with meta, so I won't talk to you because you use WhatsApp. Well, guess what? You probably just traded an infinitesimal moral high ground for a human connection.
It's simple. It's simple that we are meant to be a social creature. We connect. That will be misused in many of the offerings we have. I think the answer is awareness, and more importantly, what you said, playfulness, that you can basically be creative without having an open heart and the spirit of a child exploring. and that will lead to some surprising solutions. The person who discovered fracking was trying to solve the problem. He was trying to basically solve the problem of pollution, and it's used for the opposite. Or Nobel discovered dynamite. That didn't go as expected. He was trying to get people out of the coal mine. So human creativity is like a double-edged sword by design.
AI as well. I had a very interesting conversation with my eye doctor yesterday about all of the advances in medical technology in terms of recognizing degenerative eye nerve damage patterns that are opening up new treatments and new diagnoses, and how humans will benefit from the application of AI to his field of medical science. And then there's also companies like Palantir that are using it to control you and spy on you, or weapons companies that have AI drones that will know how to hunt you and kill you. So it's the whole human experience is there. I mean, AI was born of the human experience, and it encompasses the human experience, and Exactly. It will permeate the human experience.
I think that's a very good fundamental way to look at life, and playfully. And there's a lot of darkness out there, so playfulness does not equal denial, and also being strict on certain issues does not mean being conservative. Just means that everybody has to have a moral guideline for himself, also to be excellent and happy. So if we learn something from Greek philosophy, is that being excellent and following your moral compass leads you to a form of satisfaction. And that was in times where wars never stopped. Not that they do now, but we come after the great peace of 7 years in the Western world, and the shockwaves we experienced in the last decade in our personal and public life make that clear. We went down a very different road that one I was expecting to talk about with you, but in the end it feels completely right and completely in accordance to what our interests and where the first AI would figure out, what do you spend your time on?
Me?
Not you, every one of us. So, and what you commit your job to, your personal decisions. So committing to music and trying to make products and software actually explain a lot of the background of what we talk about. I have a question for you that would link this to a lot of the talks we had here in the past months. How do you think composition and, for example, film composing will change with the use of AI? I'm just asking you to make a prediction. I'm biased because I've seen how what tools exist, what works, what practices are there. So,
well, I mean, it's fantastic. And I can imagine how it will change, whether that's the reality or not. So with composition and then the smaller subset of that, film composition, what's your goal in composing music in the first place? What are you trying to achieve? This is really interesting, because when I think of composers, I start like with Chopin and Bach and Schubert, my favorites. And I think to this like incredible explosion of originality that could only have come from them and will never be replicated in any way whatsoever. It's so unique, you could never create Beethoven's 10th Symphony. Never. Not all the music scholars on earth, even with the fragments that he left behind. It will never be Beethoven's 10th Symphony. It's missing that he had, nobody else. So what are you trying to do when you compose? If you're a film composer, you're trying to enhance and steer the story of the filmmaker. You're in service to the film. If you really are doing a good job, then you're simply trying to make the film the best film that it can be. And I take like Star Wars as an example of that. A very weak film in a lot of ways that was made glorious by its music.
Also the first tuba solo orchestral composition that went so popular, right?
Exactly. So as a film music composer, what are you trying to do? As a composer in general, what are you trying to do? If what you're trying to do is make an experience in a broader context really powerful, then AI is going to be really good for you, because it's really easy now, given all of the things that have already been created, to find something very close to what you want, take a look at it, think, okay, how can I make this my own? Just move it over here a little bit, or move it up here a little bit, and then it's someplace and something that never existed before. It's yours, but you didn't have to necessarily pull it out of nothing. But I don't think anybody pulls anything out of nothing. I think there's always context. Chopin heard something.
There's no
that inspired him to go and do the military waltz.
You just can have a direct derivative directly that gives you a guideline. Instead of just being inspired, you could have something. Graphic design is very much like that. We understand this better visually. Like, for example, if you take something like Mondrian, that has influenced software design to an extreme, to make a very long shot oversimplification. So instead of just being inspired in an emotional neuroscience way, you can be inspired in a textural way by having a derivative, for example, having a string section written in the way another composer did, and then interact with it and change it.
Yeah. And I think, your question is very philosophical to what is music in the first place, because I also think about composers who thought what their purpose was to be the torchbearer of the lineage of Beethoven to Brahms to Wagner, and now it's my turn, and I have to carry it further. And then you got to this cliff with atonalism with Schoenberg and Berg and Webern and the Second Viennese School, and people were like, okay, that's the torch I got. Here I go. Where's that going to lead me? My school teachers are telling me it has to be 12-tone or it's not relevant, and it got like we lost the question, we lost the thread of why we were doing it in the first place. Meanwhile, people who had absolutely no concern for whose torch they were carrying were making jazz. And then later hip hop. They weren't concerned about like their lineage. They were concerned about expression of what they were experiencing as humans in that place and that time on Earth in history. And they did it with the tools that were available to them, which were unique. Honky-tonk piano versus home recording studio later in Detroit when hip hop was being generated. So every one of us as a composer of film music has to think about their expression. Why are you doing it in the first place? Is it just to get a paycheck? Well, then go make the greatest movie you want and use Sora. And make it your own a little bit so you don't get directly accused of plagiarism. If you want to bear the torch of Schoenberg or Webern or Stockhausen or whomever, okay, go ahead, do it. If that's your expression, more power to you. You
see why you ended up doing a spec software, because it's a reminder. It's a reminder about staying focused in the end. In the end, that mirrors the whole thought process behind what you're also building, that we have to be context aware of what we're trying to create, and the tools are secondary. It's just about the awareness.
Well,
and
the intent, the input is intent.
Absolutely.
With SpecKitty, the input that you give it is your intention. And that's why I turn the question to the composers: what is your intention?
Yeah, I say that's exactly what I will keep from this, that human intention and creation will be altered, changed. There's inherent risks and biases, but if we stay focused on creating, then the tools are secondary. And like you said, hip-hop or misusing tape or misusing recording, sampling, all those things are wrong fundamentally, but they create a known language that inspires and creates. And in the end, AI will be, for some artists, a tool they will misuse, deform, and their own intent will actually be I think in the end with art, intent, even if it's an abstract intent of creating an emotion, that's how we measure things. If it's impactful and if it achieves its intent, even if it does it in the opposite way of what we thought it would. So I keep that from what you're saying, if I rephrase it through my own lens. And that brings me back to a thought spontaneously. In the project with Kimiko Shizaka, there was an unfinished piece you had finished. Do I remember correctly?
Yeah. So you're referring to Bach's
Well-tempered.
Art of the Fugue.
Okay.
And that was a piece that he wrote over many years and then presumably never finished, or maybe he did and we lost part of it. Nobody's quite sure, but he was working at it. He was working on it in the last days of his life. So it's one of the last things that he penned. And the way that artists approach the art of the fugue when they perform it is to either stop abruptly, which is jarring.
I didn't know that.
Well, it's a long piece. If you started at the contrapunctus number 1 and you're all the way to the final, it's like 14 pieces or more, and it's long, then you're in a zone as a performer or as a listener that is it's meditative. It's transformative. If you've managed to pay attention to the music that long, you're
Absolutely.
in a mental state that is in a different dimension. And then when it just stops, you feel death. You feel Bach's death. It's amazing. And to complete that, to write a completion of that, has to be a recognition that you are not Bach.
Absolutely.
You are not carrying Bach's torch, but you have a valid idea of how that music can continue, and it's brave. But it's also a little bit back to the idea of the performer improviser, the performer composer. Chopin's a great example, in Beethoven too, where they were, what was their intent? A lot of times it was writing music that they either performed the night before, like Schubert would go and write down the things that he had improvised as his Schubertiade on the night before, or pieces that they wanted to perform. Franz Liszt, he performed all the works, he wrote them for himself because they were glorious technical achievements that only he at the time could play. So for Kimiko Ishizaka to complete Bach's Art of the Fugue, it meant several things, because there's nobody on earth who reveres Bach's music more than Kimiko Ishizaka. She's reverent to an extreme of his music and his ability. So she couldn't have done that if there was any ounce of disrespect or diminishing. So it had to be hers. It had to be known that it was hers, and it is actually in a different style in a way than Bach, and it's definitely not what Bach would have written, but it is, in my opinion, a wholesome and satisfying completion of the work, which is kind of this surprising achievement. I don't know how that ties into everything.
I can tell you why, because I know why I put that question. That was the inspiration to invite you.
Oh.
Because, as you see, I tried to approach coding and AI and music and composition from that perspective, and I think you have a very unique trajectory in that. And for me, the example of finishing that has the same inherent questions about what an AI would finish without diminishing the incredible talent of Kimiko. I'm talking about the ethical choice behind it.
So I'm hearing a little bit of what would happen if you were to throw Bach's Art of the Fugue into an AI and say, based on all of the data in the preceding 14 pieces, what is the logical conclusion? Because that's actually a really great analogy. You have to appreciate the analogy, we have to talk a little bit more about what AI does, because it's a token predictor. What does that mean? It means given these words, what's the next word? And then that's all it does. It puts a word on the end of a string of existing words, and then that gets fed back in. And so, okay, now with that word in place, what's the next word? And then that gets fed back in. What's the next word? And it just does it really fast. So it basically predicts the next word in a row, and completing Bach's Art of the Fugue would be exactly the same thing. It would be, what's the next note? What's the next note?
For me, the scientific experiment would be if we ran a few iterations and we took a few people who had their own view on it. That's a very interesting cognitive experiment, because you see my own personal journey about trying to navigate what my opinion is on creating, co-creating, being inspired, using an instrument. So for me, it's really, that was and there's no way to have a talk like this and script it. So I was trying to see how you're going to react to the parallel between how we as humans have a form of human intelligence and interpretation and deeper cognitive depth, and how a technology does that. And I just wanted to put that question, and that's also what binds your interest, in my opinion, that I see the similar searching for depth in those approaches, and I try to connect the lines, even if sometimes doing that is my own imagination. But isn't that how we interpret art and projects? So this kind of talk we do here is meant to go off tangent, and if in an ideal world no one can predict a conversation like that, and no AI tool would be able to go that, why did they jump from this to this, even if it had our cognitive history. And I want to thank you for sharing your thoughts and giving people some insight, because people talk a lot about AI. I consider myself informed, but it's impossible to keep up. And that's why I found it interesting for people in the arts to hear from also someone who's in technology, but who understands the depth of the art, who organized concerts, who worked as a producer, and tried to put some sense into the whole discussion about AI, even if we got too technical or if we got too abstract. I think it's important to lay a foundation like that. And I want to thank you for your time on doing that. And I'm really curious about whether we're going to do this experiment with finishing the Bach. Because I think that would be an interesting experiment, because it highlights the ethical, moral continuation problem. I think it explains a lot about what we're struggling and what we should appreciate about our own humanity, and also what happens to the tools we create.
Well, if I can extend the closing cadence here just a little bit, if we were to have an AI complete Bach's Art of the Fugue, we'd have to make a taste-making decision. We'd have to give it a specification with an opinion, because there is a great unknown. Does Bach return to the opening contrapunctus theme, if I may, da dee da 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 da, because that permeates the first half of the piece and then shifts its shape to be unrecognizable from what it started to be. And a lot of people think that the final fugue at the end, the part that's missing, would have brought that back. And Kimiko Ishizaka didn't. Other completions have. So if we were going to give AI a specification to do that, we would probably have to give the opinion and the taste-making decision in advance. Should it return to Contrapunctus 1 or not?
I think for people out there who are wondering what it would be like to work with AI and haven't done that, this is a pretty abstract example that gives an idea of what the challenge is. This gave me a lot of food for thought, and I'm really interested in how things develop and where this journey will take you and the rest of us with the developments we have around us. I'm going to thank you again, and I think I will remember this, because this example you gave about AI needing a specification for going in a direction to finish it shows the necessity for intent and humanity in creation. And I will keep that as my temporary permanent conclusion on the issue.
Aren't we all temporarily permanent?
We are mortal, and we are challenged by our own nature to think like that. Thank you very much, Robert.
Thank you.